Peter grew up in the Richtersveld, and so from childhood he was surrounded by that ecology. He imbibed that as a child. He spent 22 years cataloging all the flora of the region and made an incredible study of it. And then he progressed from ecology to botany, and then finally horticulture at the end. So he's just getting into that. And a part of what's led into that is the enormous epidemic of poaching in South Africa. So he is now sitting on thousands and thousands of plants that were dug out of the ground by somebody that have to be preserved, and he has created a nursery to take care of them. And so we really are appreciative of all his efforts, and we will see some of his insights into the wonderful world of the Richtersveld. Peter?
Thank you, Brian. Super. So we are a little bit behind time, so I'll try to do this as quick as possible. I want to greet you and introduce myself in one of the oldest languages on earth. So, Eintjies, Tirake Uberoep. So that's how you greet in the Nama language, which is one of the Khoi languages, and it's good day. My name is Peter Ant, or Mir, as the local people call me, because they say I'm always working and I'm always walking around and I'm always climbing. So in the next 2 days, I will be presenting 2 more presentations, and then I'll give a little bit more background on who I am, what I do, my research, my work, and all that. But for now, I would love to introduce you to some of the most spectacular adapted species of plants on our planet. In my opinion, in the Richtersveld, which is in the northwestern corner of South Africa, and in the southwestern corner of Namibia. I work in both countries. And the area is known as the Richtersveld bioregion, or also known as the Gariep. Surviving in a desert, there are 3 main elements to survive against. And I would like to share how species are uniquely adapted to that. So you can go to the next slide. So these 3 elements are heat, wind, and drought. And if you look at the one photo, this is a non-heat conducting camera. So the temperature reading that you're seeing at the bottom in the left corner is true air temperature. So can you imagine sitting in that for about 15 to 20 minutes? It will kill a human. So you have to hide, stay in the Orange River or under the shade of a tree. And then the photo in the right corner is during a sandstorm in the town where I live. And you can see that is 114 miles per hour wind. So in a desert, that means a lot of sand and a lot of sandblasting. And then in the corner right photo, just to explain some of the drought, the region where I live, some of the areas, the average annual rainfall is 0.04 inches per year. That's the average. And then in the high mountains, it goes up to 9 inches per year. So it's really, really drought. So one of the ways to survive in a desert is, and this is one of the unique things when you come to my part of the world, is a lot of species have learned to live among quartz. And the reason for that is because the quartz stones, they reflect a lot of heat, and then also they stay much longer cold in the morning hours than other types of rock, which means when the air temperature starts to rise around them, then condensation happens on them, and there's a little trickle of water down them. And plants and mosses and algae and lichens and all wonderful organisms have learned to make use of this. And if you look very carefully in this photo, you'll see there's 3 Avonia or Anacampsoros paparacea. We call them chicken poo, tortoise feet. They've got different names. And they took this adaptation of living amongst quartz to a whole new level. And they actually became like quartz. So they've got the special adapted scales that covers the leaves and that helps to insulate the leaves, but also reflect heat. And then this one in a photo, I waited 9 years. So for 9 years, every year going to the population before finally I got the first one in flower, just to discover that the flower only opened for an hour. So I was very lucky. And this is Avonia garipensis. It's endemic to the farm where I grew up. That's called Koordoring. And then also about the Avonia is the stems are normally lying flat, and then when they go in flower, only for that time until the seeds are dispersed, the stem will lift up. And then many of you, I see you are selling them here in San Diego. How lovely, but odd they look here. They're about 5 times higher than what they would be in nature. But I'm sure many of you are acquainted with the window plant. So one of the wonderful ways that a lot of species in the Richtersveld have learned to survive drought and heat is by living subterranean. However, there's a bit of a challenge if you live underground, because especially if you're a plant, how are you going to photosynthesize? So what the window plant does in habitat, it seems in cultivation it doesn't do this, because of lush conditions, but in habitat, the leaves, they would be shrink or shriveled, and in the dry time, and the moment rain falls, they will swell up, and then it would push only the tip of the leaf above the ground. And if you look at the tip of the leaves in this photo, you'll see they're translucent, and they've got these little windows to allow sunlight to shine down into the plant that's underground. And then when they dry, they just shrivel up again and disappear as if they never existed. And the next one is how one of these beauties look when they're in flower. I love them. So they're about, 10 meters is probably 30 feet, something like that, from my mother's house. And I told Brian a story about I almost killed my brother-in-law before I knew he will become my brother-in-law, to protect window plants and other rare succulents, because where they grow is the favorite playground for people with quad bikes. And I was one of that children that would put planks with nails in it under the ground to give them flat tires. And then he made such a huge accident that he broke both his collarbones. And I had a bad reputation in the town I grew up. So yeah, the other way to survive heat is just simply change your color. Like the desert chameleon. And if you look at the top photo, this poor guy is like really pushing himself high above the ground because the soil is probably warm enough to bake an egg. And it's very light. But then if you look at the bottom photo, you'll see the sunny side is dark and the shaded side is light. So that was probably a very cold morning. But yeah, this is a chameleon. So how about a plant doing what an animal does? So this is one of my favorite plants. It's a common weed. People don't like it. They don't grow it. We call it, I don't know how you say this in English, thermometer in Afrikaans. So it's the thing that you measure heat. What's that called in English? It's too difficult word, but you know, you got it. So this wonderful plant is super successful in the desert. And one of the reasons why it's so successful, the leaves are white underneath. And when temperatures becomes too hot, then the leaf bends up towards the sun, it reflects the heat of the sun, and the moment when it's cool or too cold, it bends the opposite way, and it shows the dark side to the sun to absorb heat. So I mean, how cool is that? I really feel sorry for people that are vegetarians, because I think plants are higher organisms than animals. But that's my opinion. So yeah, another way to stay cool in the Richtersveld or the Gariep Desert is by being like the toktoki. So the toktoki, it's called that because when the males attract a female, they would find the stone if they're lucky, and then they would knock their bum on it and go tok, 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 tok. And the one that knocks the hardest would get the female. But unlike us that overheat when we run, they stay cool by running. And the very cool thing in the desert is that if you're on the plains where it's normally much hotter than up in the mountains, their feet are extremely long, or their legs. And the higher you go up in the mountains, the cooler it is, the shorter their legs are. So on the plains, we normally also call them Ferraris, because they just are going zoom, zoom, zoom. If they stand still for too long, they would just bake and be cooked by the sand. They've got an amazing breathing mechanism, which I'm not going to go into now, which tells a beautiful story about the evolution. And anyone can contact me or ask more about that, or just Google toktoki. Don't believe everything Google say though. Yeah, and then another way to survive in heat in the desert is by being nocturnal. And I specifically choose to show these 3 species of gecko. In 2016, only for the first time in the history of my part of the world, there was a survey done on geckos. And within 5 days at 4 localities, 22 species of gecko were recorded. And after that, more and more were recorded. And within 5 days, 67 species of reptile were recorded. And we only found out in 2016 that the Richtersveld is the highest in gecko diversity, outcompeting Central Africa, Congo, and as well as Madagascar, which no one knew before that. And I think it's really cool. Most of them are nocturnal. Most of our animals are nocturnal, especially in the summer months, because it's just simply too hot. Even me and my team at the nursery are nocturnal in the summer months. And so we work night shift, just too hot. And then one would not think of the desert as a place for frogs, but we've got 14 species of amphibia. Most of them are confined to the Orange River, which is the longest river in Southern Africa. But then there are 4 species of frog that takes surviving against drought, surviving against heat and wind to a complete different level. And these are some of them. The top 2 frogs, the Namakwa stream frog, or we call him Blikslander, which means like hitting on a tin. That's the sound they make. And then the paradise toad, when fully grown, it's the size of my thumbnail. So it's a minute little thing. And in recent years, we experienced an immense drought. And we really thought like this, it's 5 years of no activity, like zero, nothing. We thought, well, this is the end for these 2 frog species. And in 2023, when the rain returned, they arise after 5 years of hibernating without food and water. And how they do this is they form a saliva around the body, then they slow down their heart rate to almost 1 beat per hour to use as little as possible energy. And before doing this, they go deep into the crevices of rocks where it's nice and cool and damp, or hopefully damp, and there they sit and they wait for the rain to come. The moment that the air pressure drops, and it shows that it's going to rain, they know this before it rains, and then it would appear. And this is why the Nama people call them thunder frogs, and they believe they fall out of the sky, because they're normally not there. And then we have the desert rain frog, together with the Namakwa rain frog, which I'm going to show in a video now, which is a species of frog, if you put it in water, it will drown. It only lives in sand, and they highly localized endemic. They're critically endangered, all of these 4 species. But how cool is it that from my part of the world, there's actually a frog that's gone viral? I don't know if you know about frogs that's gone viral, but we have one that I think 15 or 16 years ago, within 5 days of being shared, it got shared over 20 million times on YouTube. And within a few months, over 80 million times, and now it's been hundreds of million times. So yeah, so if you can watch the video on your own by searching on Google, the world's cutest frog. And this is one of them giving a distress call. Anyway, I'll continue. So yeah, so very cute frog indeed, and it was actually swearing at the guy making the video, by the way, if you understand frog. Yeah, so another way to survive the drought and the heat and wind is by being annual or in a form of seeds. And every now and then, or actually quite rare, then we would have the super bloom that would happen and the desert floor would be turned into a kaleidoscope of colors, which is really beautiful, and you need to be there. In 2023, we had the biggest bloom. You can Google super bloom, and then you see some beautiful videos by Leon Klicher, who does the Chelsea Flower Show for South Africa, and he's like a plant celebrity. You see some of the videos they made in 2023, which was the biggest flowering event that in human memory. And it was really like being in heaven. And then, another way to survive from drought and all these conditions, again in the form of seeds, but is by having seeds that can survive for very long. And many of you are aware of ice plants, and I don't know how many of you are aware of the special mechanism of their fruits. So that's one of the characteristics of the old family Mesembryanthacea, is they have these woody fruits with locules that when it rains, there's little structures in the inside called open bodies, and they would swell up and they would push this door open and to allow the seeds to be spread right at the right moment, and that's when it rains. But it almost never spreads all of the seeds, and when it gets dry, then these little sponge structures, they just dry up and they pull the door close again, and the seeds are protected. So we don't actually know how long these seeds can survive in habitat. When I go back, I'm going to start a new research study where I'm looking at dunes, that at the bottom of the dunes are several thousand years old that moved over silty soil, to see if there's any living seeds still underground that's protected by the dunes. So I'll keep you posted on that if you follow me. And then something extreme in my part of the world. I mean, as a child, I hated the wind because I wanted to always be outside and I always wanted to look at plants. And can you just imagine photographing this tiny little delicate flowers in over 100 miles per hour wind? It's really difficult. And this is a video that I took. And I was in a vehicle and all the windows was closed. But yeah, to put this in perspective, imagine yourself at 110 to 120 miles per hour being hit by watermelons. So that's how it must feel for a lot of these creatures that lives in the desert. But they've got really special ways to survive against this. And I would like to share one of my most favorite plants that grows very close to my parents' house. This is the gomvijgie, or the glue mesum. And what a lot of species have learned to do in my part of the world, we're actually the highest in the world in species that are psamophorus or psamophytes, which are plants that love sand. And what they do, if you look close at the leaves, you'll see they're covered with sand, and they make a glue around the leaves, and then sand attached to the leaf to form a shield against sandblasting. So it's almost like they're putting on little windbreakers against the sand. But the amazing thing is there's 27 species that's known, and I just I'm now maybe or might not, because of the poaching pandemic, describe a new species of Brunsvigia. That's also a psamophyte. And the Vigio ice plant is a dicot, and then the next one, exactly the same mechanism, but this is a monocot. So this is Stromaria bidentata. It's a species that grows on the farm where my grandmothers used to farm on Koordoring. And you can see the leaves beautifully covered with sand. But remarkable about this species is its beautiful flowers and then also its seeds, and I've only seen it twice in my life in flower. And there's the beautiful flowers. So very cool about it is because of being Amaryllidaceae, and most of the amaryllids in my part of the world having fleshy seeds, in winds that's so strong, in temperatures that's so extreme, you have a bit of a challenge if you have a fleshy seed. And what this plant have learned to do is to plant its own seeds. So when the seeds are ready to germinate, the whole mother stem bends down and it pushes the seeds into the ground and then release them where they are safe from the elements. So very cool plant. And then something really, really interesting is this little spider. I mean, what is the chance the first time in your life collecting something and it's new to science? And this is exactly what happened with the spider. The University of Pretoria was looking for a specific species of buckspoor spider. I came across a nest and I thought, oh, well, here they are, and collected them. And then after sending specimens away, Prof. Ansi Dippenaar Schoeman, who is the leading scientist on spiders in Africa, she sent the email back to me, this is not what we were looking for, but this is a new species to science. And I thought, oh, this is crazy. But why I'm sharing this is this species really takes survival to the ultimate level. I mean, it's crazy. The nest of the females, so the females will live up to a year, and their nest would only be a few inches deep. And then underneath the doors, so they make, in the next photo, there's the nest, and that's why they're called buckspoor spider, because it looks like a print of a buck. But the temperature under the roof of the nest have been measured to fluctuate between 140 degrees Fahrenheit up to 170 degrees Fahrenheit in summer months. And right down at the bottom where the female is sitting, it would fluctuate in summer months between 120 degrees Fahrenheit up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And the spider survives. And they mainly feed on sugar ants. The edges of the doors are sticky, so if an ant runs over it, it gets stuck on the door, and a female would come and upside down and she would pull the ant in. If she's lucky and a male finds her, because she's confined to home and the males are free range, so they're running around the show. But if she's lucky and a male gets her and they breed, she would raise for 1 year the babies. At the end, sacrifice herself to be eaten by the babies, and the babies would then eat the nest. And if there is females, they would spread to about 1.5 meters, which is about, 5 feet or something like that, away from the mother's nest. And remarkable about this buckspoor spider, so they're amazingly adapted to survive in the desert, is, so seeing that my nickname is Ant, or Mir, or in the Nama language, Uproep, the one day I was sitting in this place called Araman's Hoek, which means poor man's corner, and I was drinking tea. I love drinking tea. and I put the tea bag between my feet, and there were a lot of ants that was joining me because I'm also an ant, and they were all sitting around this bag drinking tea. And I looked at them and I saw, but one of them was running very quickly up and down, and he just looked odd. Something was not kosher. And I caught it and I looked at it and I said, no, but you're not the ant. And I realized it's one of the buckspur spiders, and it's the male. So the males have special two front legs that are longer than all other legs for one purpose, and that's to act as the antenna of an ant. So they scent themselves with the ants, they live with the ants, and then when it comes close to an ant, its feet would touch the antenna of the ant like they're chatting. And but if it catches an ant alone, it will snatch it, run away, go and eat it up, and then come back and live with the buffet. So really, really cool spiders. How much time do I have, Kelly? And then, yeah, another way to survive is by living on cliffs, vertical or in shade. And I thought to share, because we've got many cliff species uniquely adapted to cliffs, but one of the coolest ones is the species called Colpeas mollis, also known as the Namaqua clipblom or rock flower. And really nice about them, so they adapted to grow in full shade. They can grow in a little bit of sunshine. But very cool of them is when the flowers are finished flowering and the seeds are ready to set, the flower would bend 180 degrees around and push onto the rock, like really squeeze. And if it's lucky and the flower finds the crevices, then it would squeeze into the crevices and release the seeds in the rock. And they would never live underneath the cliffs. It's only on the cliffs that they survive. And I've got no idea how the first one arrived on the cliff, but they are definitely there. A beautiful plant. I'm stuck again. I need to go. This is such a cool plant. So yeah, so a lot of species have learned to form very special leaves, curly whirlies we call them, and this one is called Cucumacranca or Cephalus. And what species like this do in an environment like the desert is by curling your leaves or forming strange hair and things like that, either you can comb moisture out of the atmosphere, or you can shade the inner or younger leaves or create shade for yourself, or protect the inner leaves from sandblasting. So this is Cephalus namaquensis. This is one that's abundant where I live. This is how they look after the winter growth season. And then if rain falls at the right time, this is how the flowers look. So they're really spectacular. It's the quickest flowering plant, I don't know in the world, but at least in Africa. So it would produce this massive white cup-shaped flower within anything from 18 to 22 hours. And this that you see in the picture is only half of the flower. The ovary sits inside the bulb, and inside the bulb, the fruits, a little sack of tiny little seeds, will develop over months until the next year before the winter rains start, and only then this banana would arrive above the ground, which is very delicious to eat, and they used to use it to flavor brandy. But luckily that's been banned. And here's some of our species, which Uncle Stephen Hammer would know really, really well. But yeah, so just look how remarkably close they look to one another. And so yeah, and I mean, they're not even in the same family. It's Conophytum and Anacampsaurus, but very well adapted for combing fog or moisture out of the atmosphere. And then we've got plants, organisms that are really well adapted to also make use of fog, like the plants with special hair. And this is of the fog basking beetles. There's 22 known species on the dunes in my area. And what they normally do is in the morning hours, they go onto the high dunes. Even the snakes would do this. And they would lift up their bum and then allow water to run down to drink water. But the reason why I put this in is, how about, again, and this I feel again, sorry for the vegetarians, Kelly. So how about a plant doing something like this? So yeah, so the fog basking beetles, they can lift up their bum, but this is a quite common little bulb, the Cadycrispum, and we call them the kurktrekker, which means corkscrew, that they use for taking out the cork out of a wine bottle. But the closer you get to the coast of the Carib, the more longer hair they form on the edges of the leaves, and the leaves are this beautiful little channel. And I've seen this many times where dew, the drop would run down the hair into the channel and then goes down, swirls down all the way down to the bulb. So how cool is it that a plant can do something like that? And then I have to share, I actually chose this morning, I'm almost done. I chose this morning to just add this quickly. This is the quickest growing fern on earth. So it can grow from nothing to about this high within 18 to 25 hours and producing spores. So Caelanthus robusta, but that's not why I added it. A few weeks ago, I collected, in 2022, in June or July, I collected of this Caelanthus induta, I collected leaves with the idea of having spores and one day trying to grow this from the spores. So in June or July, one of those 2 months in 2022, I put it into a drying room until June last year. And zero humidity. If you touch the leaves, they would turn into powder. So the next picture is how they looked when I removed them a few days or a few weeks ago. And that's how they look. Well, I spoiled my own surprise. But anyway, so long story short, that's a sign that I must finish. When I took this ferns out of the dry room in June last year, and then I transferred it into a deep freezer at way below freezing point. And just to preserve it, and a few weeks ago I decided, let me try to grow them, and this is how they looked when they came out. And then to my absolute shock, the next day, so remember more than 2 years of drying at less than 5% humidity present, and then for more than 6 months freezing, and it's just leaves. It's not attached to a stem or anything. And then, yeah, this is the shock I got. I did not know this is going to happen. And I've made it now a little project, and it just shows how amazing life are in the desert, that I already dried them, I've put them back into the freezer, and as long as I live, I hope until 127, every year I'm going to take it out and see how long this leaf can do this. But don't you just think this is the best house plant to have? You can just forget about it, and, and temperature doesn't seem to be a problem whatsoever. And I want to finish with something very cool. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but it just shows the level of adaptation of the Richtersveld. And comparing that to places like the Americas, the Richtersveld is an ancient center of evolution. And I'll share a little bit more about that and show you more of the most beautiful succulents and bulbs that's found there in the coming days. But I would like to finish with Dregiocolua pumila, which is the only succulent grass, well, according to my knowledge, the only succulent grass on earth that is really a succulent. And this miniature little thing is endemic between Alexander Bay and Lüderitz in the Richtersveld-Ocharib area. And oddly, genetically, its closest relative is the gigantic Phragmites australis, which I heard is a bit of a pest here. But yeah, so very cool thing from my area. Thanks to everyone, and thanks for everyone who sponsored me, for Kelly, for Brian, for being so hospitable.